And here we are at the end of another long contest season. We have a new world champion of public speaking, Sabyasachi Sengupta. A shout out to Sabyashi's region, Region 10, which is Europe, which is my region. So we have another European champion as the world champion of public speaking. So always nice to see someone from this region win, because selfishly, I look at that and I think, if someone from this region can win, then I'm in this region. I can win one day as well. Now, I'm not going to go through so much of the preamble and the setup and the context that I've done for this particular World Championship. I've done most of that in the two previous videos, talking about the context around these winners, talking about my approach in terms of we're not looking at this from a judging perspective, we're looking at this from a speech perspective. So all I'm really going to do now is just give my usual disclaimer that today we're using the footage provided by Toastmasters International. I do not claim ownership for this footage. The use of this footage is for informational and educational purposes only. And today, who else would we want to learn from apart from a world champion of public speaking? Let's look at this speech, Just Nod, by Sabyasachi Sengupta.
You should know what this stage does to us. This is that one safe space where we can be creative, weird, wacky, right?
Oh, the very first thing we see is the rule of three. Now, the kind of anal perfectionist in me is looking at this and going creative, weird, wacky. Oh, if only we could have had that first word beginning with W as well. Wonderful, weird, wacky. But sometimes you can over-egg these things. If it works, great, but don't try and crowbar it in. So we almost had an alliterative rule of three, but rule of three is good enough by itself. So rule of three, I've explained in loads of other videos before, but essentially it's the lowest number we recognize as a pattern, and our brains are attracted to patterns. So when you say things in threes, it draws more attention than if you say two things, or if you say three individual things, but they aren't connected together. So this is in the first 30 seconds or so. And what Sabyasachi is trying to do is he is trying to draw our attention. He wants us to pay attention to him, his speech, and his message. And he's using a technique to start to earn that attention.
Except this stage, our craft, and our audience.
So here we have another thrall. Another thrall? Another who? Here we have another rule of three, following straight off the back of that previous rule of three. Again, it's drawing that attention, it's bringing us in, and this is not the end of the rule of three.
Take this performer energy into our day-to-day lives, or we think the world will judge us, label us, maybe even laugh at us.
There we see another one, don't we? Another rule of three. And here we see that what Sabyasachi is doing with the rule of three is he is making three clear points here, essentially. He's making a point about what the stage makes us feel. He makes a point about what the stage allows us to do. And then he makes a point about what are some of the barriers or challenges that stop us to fully enjoy the stage. Here we are seeing a rule of three meta. There's a rule of three within a rule of three. He uses three consecutive rules of three to illustrate his opening points. And together, those three rules of threes in themselves form a rule of three. This is in the first 60 seconds of the speech. So Sabyasachi is really trying to pinpoint and focus our attention, and he's using the rule of three as his technique, and then he's using a meta rule of three to tie it all together.
When my dad told me I have three career options: to be a doctor, engineer, or be a disappointment.
It seems we're just talking about the rule of three here, aren't we? But we're seeing the rule of three used in different ways. This time it's used for humor. It's used in that boom boom ch section. So we've got, here are my three career options: doctor, lawyer, and in terms of the body language and gesturing, they're up here, they're seen positively, energetically, or disappointment. So instead of the rule of three being used as a pattern to tie things together, actually the rule of three is being used here to show the division. We've got dum dum poof, dum dum poof. So the rule of three is an incredibly versatile tool, and that's why it's used so often in speeches, because it draws the attention, but we can use it to draw attention in different ways. In this case, the attention is really coming into that third point, because that third point provides the contrast, and that contrast provides the humor, and that humor starts to build that relatability and connection. We've seen the use of humor in the other two placing speeches from this year that I've covered in the previous analysis videos, and we're seeing that humor coming in again here, using that humor early on as that connection tool, but also in that self-deprecating way to take the speaker off a pedestal, make them relatable, make them likable, because if we relate to someone and we like someone,
I wanted to be a Bollywood actor. You're a Bollywood actor.
This is something that I think Sabyasachi does brilliantly, is the subtle facial expressions that come through. And the importance of facial expressions are something that I really banged on about during the COVID years of being on camera. And of course, now that we live in a hybrid world where we're increasingly being on camera, is really understanding the power of our facial expressions to convey emotions. Because when you're on camera, like we are right now, you can see those facial expressions a lot more clearly. They provide a lot more non-verbal cues. It's something that doesn't have quite the same effect when you're on the physical stage, because a lot of people aren't going to see you. But here at the convention, you've got you on stage and the people close to you can see you. And I can't tell for sure based on the picture, but I'm sure there are screens which have blow-ups of the speaker. And then there's all the people who are watching online who are seeing this view that we've got right now. So the ability to be able to convey emotion through the face is still a really important ingredient, even when you're speaking in person. And I think Sabyasachi does this so well. He's got this beautiful subtlety. And they talk about pictures saying 1,000 words. Well, expressions say 1,000 words as well. And so I love all these little subtle things. It's got the eyebrows and the cheeks and the eyes. There's so much non-verbal cues that are coming through here. And it's not the only example of this that I'm going to pick up, but it's the first one that came through, and I noticed this, and I feel it's very much a signature strength of the way that Sabyasachi speaks, is his ability to communicate really kind of complex emotion through his facial expressions.
You're a Bollywood actor, right? Fix the bulb, pat the dog, fix the bulb, pat the dog. That kind.
So here we've got some more humor. Sabyasachi could probably get a little bit of a laugh if he just did the Bollywood cliche. I think people would get that. But when he adds the words to it, when he adds that little bit of a metaphor to it of fix the bowl, pat the dog, it makes it a bit more visual. And when we can see something clearer, we respond to it more fully. So instead of just doing the gesture and probably getting a chuckle, he adds the language, he adds the visuals, and he gets a bigger laugh for it. So this is a lesson for humor, that the more clearly you can get the audience to see something, the deeper the emotional reaction. And humor and laughter, after all, is just an emotional reaction. Try and make your humor as visual as possible, because the more the audience can see it, the more they're going to laugh at it.
I wanted to be conservative, so I went for the role of Romeo.
So here we see a little bit of that understated humor. I'm going to be conservative, I go for the role of Romeo, and again, it's just that little facial expression that sells it. I'm sure Sabyasachi would have gotten a laugh if he just said, I decided to go for Romeo, because people go, oh yeah, that's bold. But the pretext of the humor of, well, I'm going to be conservative, and people go, okay, is he going to be Montague number 5 or something like that? No, it's Romeo. So you get that contrast, and that produces the laugh. But then adding on top of that, the facial expression, It's a different form of humor. So he's told the joke that's not a joke. Saying that he's going for Romeo actually isn't really a joke. You might get a couple people who go, okay, that's bold, but there's no element of humor within that himself. But when he sets up that pretext of I decide to be conservative, that creates the contrast, and that's a humor. And when he has the follow-up of the facial expression, again, that visual, it just adds that little sprinkle on top. And this is an important thing to think about in terms of humor. And I've talked about it in the other videos of the other two contestants from this year. Of humor is about layering. It's not the one thing that's funny. It's the overall picture that's funny. It's how you set something up. It's how you execute it. It's how you follow it up. That is where you get great humor. No single thing by itself is particularly funny, but when you combine things, they become greater than the sum of their parts. And that's where you get the real engaging humor. So we've just got a nice little sandwich there. That was like a 5-second sandwich. It was one thing, two thing, three thing. It wasn't this big elaborate skit, but that little sandwiching creates better humor than if Sabyasachi had used any one of those techniques by itself.
You know why? Because there were 20 other actors, tall, chisel jaw, and enthusiastic. And there was me, enthusiastic.
Here we see more of that self-deprecating humor. And again, we actually see the rule of three coming in here as more. We actually have the rule of three as the setup of all the other actors are tall, chisel-jawed, enthusiastic. So that rule of three sets up the ideal for Romeo. And then when Sabyasachi comes in with, I am 1 out of 3, that's what creates the humor. We're seeing the rule of three being used a lot in this speech. And it's not the last example I'm going to bring up either. But this is where you're starting to see the versatility of the technique. The rule of three isn't just for, well, I want to list 3 things so that people remember them more, or they listen to them more. Yes, that's part of it. But there's so much more to the rule of three technique here. And here we see it being used for a humorous slant, but in a different way to how it was previously used for humor. So it's a beautifully versatile technique. And when you go to any beginning Toastmasters session, or you start learning about public speaking online and someone tells you about the rule of three, that's such a simplistic way of looking at it to begin with, is, oh, well, I've just got to say things in threes. Yes, the rule of three is about saying things in threes, but it's not just about saying things in threes. It's about choosing when you're going to use it, and most importantly, choosing why you're going to use it. And what we're seeing here is that full suite of use of the rule of three technique. It's being used in perhaps its more traditional way, just to draw attention to 3 important points, but you're starting to get to see it being really played with and utilized with its full spectrum of capability in this speech.
Your eyes are as pretty as river Ganga. Your figure is as perfect as the Taj Mahal. Your breath is as fresh as Indian curry. Tell me, Juliet, tell me, will you be mine?
Here we see a little bit of singing in the speech. Singing has come up here and there in the World Championship of Public Speaking. It has sometimes played its part in the winning speech, and there's a few that I haven't covered from previous years that I will eventually get to cover on this channel, which use singing as part of their speech. We've also seen some other finalists and places who've used singing. So singing is a tool that you can bring in. I talked a lot in the previous video on Mas Mahia. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. Why wouldn't you? How he was really focused on sounds in his speech and thinking really about the auditory experience. And singing is another one of those tools where you're creating this auditory experience for the audience. Now, of course, an entire speech is an auditory experience because you're listening to someone's words. But actually, a lot of time in speeches, you're really trying to make it a visual experience rather than an auditory experience. You're trying to get the audience to see things by describing it with your words, rather than getting them to experience something by the sounds of your words. But singing very much falls into that second camp of you're creating this different experience. You're creating this multi-sensory experience for the audience. And one of the key things in great storytelling is about creating that sensory experience. You'll probably remember when you were in your early years of school, teachers told you when you write a story, try to use the five senses, right? Try to talk about what the characters can see, what they can hear, what they can smell, what they can feel, what they can taste. When you do this in a speech, when you're creating visuals, but you're also creating that auditory experience, and maybe you're going to create some smell in there at some point, but that's a lot more niche. When you're experiencing something using more than one sense, you're experiencing it at a deeper level. So when you have singing in a speech, it's creating this different multi-sensory experience. Now, this isn't to say that you should come up onto stage and sing your speech. And in fact, I kind of recommend you don't. I have seen examples of that, and it doesn't really work, to be honest. But when you can bring it in, if you can sing to a decent level, do it. It's another tool in your toolbox. It's not something you have to use all the time, but it's one of the tools in the toolbox. And Sabyasachi knows that's a tool. And I think Sabyasachi will say himself, he isn't an amazing singer, but that's almost a little bit of the point of the story of he's this aspiring Bollywood actor, and he knows that Bollywood actors has to sing, and he does a little bit of singing here. So it's actually playing into his role and playing the part of the character in this story as well as creating that multi-sensory experience for us. So singing isn't necessarily a fundamental public speaking. It's not like, oh, well, if I can't sing, I should never do a speech. But if you have that as a tool in your toolbox, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more options that you have. You can choose which tool to use when, what circumstance, and when you think it'll be most appropriate.
Then I knew my dream to be an actor was definitely dead. I can never be a...
Here we have some alliteration. Definitely dead. And alliteration is actually another one of these auditory tools. It's very different from singing, but it's more about the sounds of the words that draw our attention. And that's why we use alliteration, because our brain is wired to pick up patterns. We've talked about this in this video before. When we hear that pattern, when we hear that repetition of sound, we pay more attention to it. So definitely dead. At this moment, we're paying attention to the plot twist in Sabyasachi's story. This is the low point where he's going for his dreams, he wants to make it, and they're definitely dead. It's gone. And at this important moment in the story, he wants to draw our attention to that. And he uses that alliteration to focus that attention, see the challenge, see the failure, feel the pain.
Take up a job in finance. Now, finance professionals are really fun. They are curious, they are energetic, open to new ideas.
Here we see a rule of three again, don't we? But it's being used in a slightly different way. He lists all of these qualities of people who work in finance, but actually he's not really drawing attention to these three things. He's using a bit of an underused component of humor, which is sarcasm. And a lot of people say, well, sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. And you've got to be very careful when you use sarcasm, because sometimes sarcasm can rub people off the wrong way. But for me, coming from a British culture, we love sarcasm in the UK. It's part of our repertoire of cynical, dark humor. And so sarcasm can be used effectively. And here we see the rule of three. The rule of three is being presented, but actually he's not wanting to draw attention to the things that he's said. He's wanting to draw attention to the opposite of what he said. And so the way that he sells this is he delivers the line, but what do we see again? We see the utilization of that facial expression, the facial expression to convey and communicate the emotion that he said one thing, but he really means another. And that's the power of facial expression. We don't watch that and go, oh yeah, that's what he thinks finance professionals are. Even though those that he has literally said finance professionals are creative and whatever the other three things were, I know they were lies. He said, this is what finance professionals are. And I'm sure almost nobody watches this speech and go, oh, that's actually what he thinks. Because we know the words are not the truth. We know the expression is the truth. And that's why facial expressions are so important, because facial expressions are the truth. If your face does not match what you say, people don't listen to the words, people look at the face. So you've got to be mindful of, is your facial expression matching the words that you're saying? Here, Sabyasachi is using a very deliberate mismatch for humorous effect. But don't be caught on the flip side of this, where you have a mismatch, but you're not intending it to be humorous. You're talking about being excited and happy, but your face doesn't show it. You're talking about being cool, calm, and collected, but your face doesn't show it. Your face is the truth.
And I'm sure when they sleep at night, they sleep with a spreadsheet on. And there I was.
We have a joke there. And what I really love about this point is that joke gets a good reaction. And it's so easy when you're a speaker with a tight time limit. 7:31, boom, you're disqualified, you're out of this. And you will have practiced this speech the microsecond. You'll know pretty much the second that your speech finishes every single time. You'll go, I pretty much finish between 7:03 and 7:07 every time I do this speech. When you get an unexpected laugh, or when you get a laugh that lasts longer, it's really tempting to go, oh no, I haven't planned for this, and step on it and squash the reaction. But what I'm pleased to see with Sabyasachi here is he sees, okay, this joke really landed, and he allows that humor to settle with the audience. He doesn't step on it. He doesn't break that humor. He allows that response, and he takes that time to enjoy the response. When you tell a joke and people laugh, enjoy it. I know for me, it doesn't happen very often. So when it does, whew, I'm savoring that. And that's what you want to do on stage. When you've worked so hard crafting your speech, when you're up here on the big stage and you've gone, I've put these jokes in, and I hope they're going to work on the big stage. I hope people are going to laugh at them. When you've put in all that work and you deliver it and it actually pays off, well, enjoy the fruits of your labor. Enjoy the results of your hard work. Let the audience laugh. And I'm so glad to see that Sabyasachi lets the audience laugh at this moment.
And one day, and also attending town halls, finance town halls, that were as interesting as the Toastmasters annual general meetings. Not the one from yesterday, from past years. And what?
So I thought this was an interesting bit. When I watched it on first occasion, it's clear Sabyasachi forgets his lines. Like he hasn't covered that up. We can see he was about to move on to the next bit, realize that he's got something, come back to it. You know what? That's fine. Sometimes you forget something. In the moment, you quickly realize and you backpedal. That's not an issue here. And as I watched this, I went, okay, so he forgot to say that. But then he came back to it, and it was it was actually quite an edgy piece of humor where he's poking fun at Toastmasters. He's poking fun at, like, my God, obviously I'm a Toastmaster. Sabyashi's a Toastmaster. I'm sure it's quite likely that you're a Toastmaster watching this as well. We'd like being a part of Toastmasters. We wouldn't be in Toastmasters if we didn't. But there's definitely aspects of Toastmasters where there is a lot of bureaucracy, ceremony, rituals and routines that to the outside world can seem a little bit odd. And to be at the World Convention, in the World Championship of Public Speaking, the flagship event for the entire organization, and to poke fun at that, that's bold. But you know what? Boldness pays off. If you want to do anything in life, you can't sit back and play it safe. You've got to be bold. And sometimes being bold gets you in trouble. Sometimes being bold allows you to push the envelope. And in this case, Sabyasachi pushes the envelope. He managed to deliver the edgy humor, poking fun, but in just the right way. It's almost like poking fun, but then poking fun back at himself at the same time of, well, this is me and I'm in this organization as well. So it's definitely edgy, but I'm here for the edgy humor. And the delivery of it, also the follow-up of it's as interesting as the AGM. But not this year's, right? And then they, well, actually, yeah, this year's as well. So the delivery of it, so I'm really glad that although he forgot it, he went back and included it in, because it was a bold piece of humor. But here's another thing. He didn't try this as his opening joke. He does this 5 minutes into his speech when he's built up a bit more of that rapport, built up more of that likability. And once you've done that, you have a little bit more license to be a bit more edgy, be a bit more bold. So although it's edgy humor, it's strategically edgy humor. And that's what I say when you're trying to be bold, absolutely be bold, but don't be reckless. Be strategically bold. Understand, what do I need to do to set myself up to build the foundations that give myself the best possible opportunity of the boldness paying off? Recklessness is just going, I'm going to say a controversial thing and hope it lands. It's, well, no, I'm going to say the thing that might be a bit uncomfortable to hear, but I'm going to say it with some money in the bank. And that's what Sabyasachi does here. He does some edgy humor, but he already has some money in the bank.
Are you sure, Sabi? That was a yes, by the way. Use the existing slides. That was a no, by the way.
We've really seen the establishment of this gesture anchor. And we talked about a gesture anchor in the last video, talking about the raindrops gesture anchor. Here Sabyasachi is using a head wobble, I guess. It makes me think of the bobble heads. We've kind of got the head bobble gesture. And he uses this in different ways throughout the speech, mostly for humorous effect. But underneath the humor, there's a little bit of seriousness, because if we look at the title and the message of this speech, Just Nod, it's really about making the most of your opportunities. It's really about saying yes to things. So using this gesture, he's used it repeatedly. He's attached it to humor. So we remember it very vividly because we remember laughing at it. But what we're going to see now as we start to get into the climax of the speech is we're going to see that anchor being used to attach a message. The reason why you make your audience laugh is to make them listen. And so far the gesture, as we're seeing it used here, is being used for humorous effect. It's being associated with laughter. It's being associated with goodwill. It's being associated with connection. Now we're going to see it associated with the take-home message and the call to action of this speech.
I can be a performer even in a boardroom with a clicker and a projector. A clicker and a projector.
Here we see the callback. We talked about callback humor in the previous analysis videos, I know. We're seeing it again here. If you've watched the other videos, I will have gone more into depth about what the callback is actually doing. But just to recap it here, what we're doing here, we've got the change the light bulb, pat the dog. That was used for humorous effect at the beginning of the speech. Here we've got the clicker and the projector being used at the end of the speech. And what this is doing is creating this narrative bridge. First of all, it's a callback. We're doing that layering of humor. It's using something that was previously established to be funny to help make this funnier. If this was the first time Sabyasachi came in at the end and he said, well, I'm now using a clicker and a projector, we wouldn't be laughing at that. We'd be like, right, okay, that's a bit of a weird way of talking about it. But because he's established that earlier with the Bollywood cliche, well, now we laugh at it, because now we're not laughing at it because it's a clicker and a projector. We're laughing at it because it links to the previous thing we laughed at. But also, as well as being that humorous callback, it's also that narrative bridge. At the beginning of the speech, Sabyasachi wanted to be that Bollywood actor. And in the middle of the speech, that turned out to be a dream that didn't come true. But by the end of the speech, we now see the dream in a different light. Very similar to the third place speech with Alan. Alan was talking about how his dream had been not failed, not unaccomplished, but recreated. That dream had transformed. And here we actually see the transformation of a dream as well. That, okay, I haven't become the Bollywood actor, but I have been able to become a performer. And that is the narrative bridge. That is the link between the start and the end of the story. This is the character development. This is the narrative development. And that is now setting up what the final message of this speech is going to be.
Yes, some days you will be trolled, some days you will be rejected, some days you will be made fun of.
Need I say any more about the rule of three? What's this, the 33rd time that the rule of three has been used in this speech? Here we're seeing it being used as the addressing of the objections. When you are selling something to someone, and bear in mind, we're not just thinking about traditional selling, buy my car. Speech is about selling ideas, but you still approach it in the same way as you would sell a product. You say, look, buy my car. Someone's going to go, yeah, but what about? You've got to address the what about. You've got to address why their objections aren't true. They go, oh, well, what about the mileage? Well, actually, it has better mileage than 90% of its competitors. Oh, really? Okay. Well, what about the color? Can I change it? Yes, you can have it in 25 colors. So what you're trying to show is that people might be worried about, well, what happens if I buy into this? What happens if I follow this idea? So that's what Sabyasachi is doing here. He's saying, look, here are some of the things you're going to encounter. Here's some of the objections. And yes, these can be concerns, but here's the prize. If you push through these objections, if you push through these concerns, this is the reward you get at the end. If you are worried about the mileage and if you're worried about the color, you can do something about that and you can get the car you want. If you're worried about the social ramifications of performing and putting yourself out there, here's how you can get what you want. So here we see the rule of three being used in another way to all the previous iterations we've talked about. It's being used here right at the end to help to address objections, to help the audience buy into the idea. And the final message, which is coming up.
Step on this stage, smile, and just nod. Not just yet.
Here we see the anchor gesture coming in. Just nod. The final gesture, the final line. And actually, so Sabyasachi says the final line of just nod. But what I really like to see here, he didn't have to say it. When he did the anchor gesture, you heard the audience go, just nod. That shows the power of an anchor gesture. That shows how you've successfully executed something. If by the time you get to the end of the speech, the audience know what it is and they can fill it in themselves. If it's Mas Mahir going, we know that's raindrops. If it's Sabyasachi going, we know that's just nod. So the audience are saying the message along at the end. So Sabyasachi has successfully built up this anchor throughout the speech, and he's built up that final message, because the final message, he's talking about standing up there, putting on your red suit, putting on your red dress, being yourself, getting up there and being the performer you want to be, saying yes to that, saying yes to yourself, saying yes to what you want to be, saying yes to taking that opportunity. We've got the final message of this speech, and it's all come together because of how Sabyasachi has set that up throughout the speech. He's been drip feeding this message throughout. He's used humor to get us to engage with that message, to engage with that gesture. So when he comes up and he rounds it off, the audience are on the same page. They know what he's saying to them. They know what he wants them to take away from it. That is messaging in action. And Sabyasachi has expertly built that up throughout his speech, and having the audience say your message, say your title at the end of your speech is really absolute chef's kiss. It's a speaker's dream for what you want from a speech. What does it take to be a winning speaker? What does it take to stand out in your field, stand out in your industry, stand out on stage? That's what the message of Sabyasachi's speech was today, about taking that opportunity, about standing out on stage, about being that performer that you were born to be. If you feel that you want some help and support to stand out on stage and be that performer, then this is where my coaching services can help you. I've put a link to my LinkedIn in the video description below. Send me a connection request there, send me a message, tell me all about your speaking. Tell me what you're working on right now, what your challenges are with your speaking, and most importantly, what your aspirations are as speaking. What's that dream? What's that big stage that you want to be on? And we can go through some of my different coaching options and find one that works for you, your journey, and your dreams. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at Sabyasachi's speech. We're going to look at, if he was to do this speech again, if he could make it even better than winning the World Championship of Public Speaking, what could he do? Because the journey for a world champion kind of only starts once you become world champion. You've then got to think about, well, what's the legacy that I built as world champion? What am I looking to springboard and do from this point on? And that's what Sabyasachi is going to be thinking about soon, thinking about where his speaking is taking him and what he wants to do. So if I was to offer some ideas and advice for how Sabyasachi can continue to grow and improve his speaking, what would those be? Couple of disclaimers for how I approach this. I've talked about this in my previous videos, but I will recap this quickly just here. The first thing that I always think about in terms of analyzing these speeches, I'm analyzing a fellow Toastmaster. I'm analyzing a fellow citizen of the world. We're not looking at some big leader, some big influencer, some big legend of the stage. So I always try to be mindful and respectful of that I'm speaking just to another member of the international community that I'm a part of. The second thing is that by the time you get to this level, you've worked so much on your speech. And the last thing that you want is more feedback, more ideas. Why don't you do this? Why don't you think of that? You really just want to take a break from the speech. You've put in all that hard work. So I wouldn't want to throw loads more things at Sabyasachi when he's really just savoring and basking in his glory of his win. And then the third thing I'm mindful of is we're looking at the world champion of public speaking here. This is a speech that has already done well enough to win. And I am not a world champion of public speaking. So Sabyasachi has been able to do something with his speaking that I haven't been able to do. So for me to stand here and be like, you should have changed this, you should have done this, I didn't think that was very good. Well, I don't think that that's the right dynamic. But as speakers, we're always looking to grow, we're always looking to improve. So with that in mind, I just take the approach that I would take in a regular Toastmasters meeting, evaluating any other member's speech. I'm going to give one suggestion in terms of content and one suggestion in terms of delivery. What was said and how it was said. And Sabyasachi could think about these, could work on them, and could take them on if the suggestions feel right for him as he continues along his journey of not trying to be a world champion of public speaking, but enjoying being a world champion of public speaking. Let's see how he can continue to grow and improve on his success.
I love you so, so much. Mwah. I was talking to the stage. If you're wondering, you should know what this stage does to us. This is that one safe space where we can be creative, weird, wacky, right? Give me a little hoo-hoo if you love the stage. I knew that. Because when...
Looking at the start of Sabyasachi's speech, I've watched this through the first time as a reaction, and I've watched it through again with my analytical head on. And for me, I felt the start was a little bit underwhelming compared to the rest of the speech and what's coming and what Sabyasachi's setting up. For me, it didn't quite click. So the first thing was, we have this moment of Sabyasachi goes down to the stage, I love you, I kiss you. And honestly, I was like, the speech is going to be about a dog. Like there's a dog down here, and he's got to talk about a dog. And he said, oh, this is me loving and kissing the stage. And I was like, right, okay, where are we going with this? And that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself. You can have that bit of curiosity and mystery at the start. And then we've got the next bit, and this is something that I talked about earlier on in the video. We've got the start, and we've got these rules of three, setting up why the stage is important. And that part's okay. And then the next part that comes is if you love the stage, give me a little whoop whoop. Now, I think this is probably a cultural aspect, but when you're at the World Championship of Public Speaking, you've got to think about cultural aspects. You're not speaking to one culture, you're speaking to a melting pot of cultures. So for me, as someone who's Scottish and then British culture in general, we're dead cynical. And for me / us, I don't really like false familiarity. We don't like people who engage with us before they've earned the right to engage with us. So what do I mean by this? So getting the audience interaction of give me a little whoop whoop, for me, my personality, my cultural background, for me, that's asking for it too soon. You're asking me to get excited for your speech, and you haven't shown me why I should be excited for your speech yet, why I should engage with it. So that for me, when I'm looking at this, that's the underlying question of, I wanted to know, why should I get excited about this speech? Why should I be interested in this speech? And I think what Sabyasachi does, I talked about it previously in the video, what he does with those successive rules of three, what he does with setting the landscape, I think does a good job of that. But these other two moments for me, they felt a little bit, I'm trying to find a word that sums up, but for me, it felt a little bit formulaic. I think that's what I'll say, of I've got to do this thing that creates a laugh, and then I've got to do this thing to interact with the audience. And I think at this moment, I wasn't in the right relational space to Sabyasachi at that moment to really engage with that. Now, if he had done these later in the speech, I think that might have been a different story. So it's not about what he did necessarily. I think it's about the timing. So what I'd be looking at in terms of this start, Sabyasachi's got plenty of humor later on. He's got opportunities to interact with the audience later on. So I don't think he needs to front load his speech and go, I need a laugh and I need some audience interaction. You're going to get that later. And you got it, Sabyasachi. It's there. Brilliant. Fantastic. What I think with this start is, I really wanted to know, how does this speech relate to me and what am I going to get from this speech? And I think if there had been a question instead, what Sabyasachi's got on his side with this speech, he's talking about performing, he's talking about being on the stage. What organization is he speaking to? He's speaking to a blooming public speaking organization. So that is a point of commonality. Every single person in that audience wants to be on the stage. There's something about being on the stage that's important to them. And that's what I think Sabyasachi should be speaking to. I think he should be speaking to something along the lines of, why do you want to be on stage? What does being on stage allow you to do? And I think if he comes in with that question, I think if he comes in with that relatability, I'm starting to see as an audience member, right, this is what's in this speech for me. This is how this speech relates to me. Whereas I think in its current iteration, I sort of felt it flip-flopped a little bit. I had the moment of the kissing the stage and the moment of the whoop whoop, and I went, why is this for me? But then we had that rule of three going in where I went, okay, now I see why this is for me. So it was half done as a starting. I wanted to see it fully done as a starting. I wanted to be sitting there for that first 60 seconds, nodding along, going, right, okay, great. I see I see where this speech is going. I see what's in it for me. I see why I want to follow. So this is the first thing I'd be looking at with this starting, is I don't think the start did the rest of the speech justice. I don't think the start set up the rest of the speech in terms of the quality of the rest of the speech. I feel that the start wasn't the springboards that I wanted to see. So I would actually be taking out the humor and audience interaction, which sounds strange because you're thinking, I need to relate to my audience in the first 60 seconds. But there's more ways to relate to an audience than just make them laugh and get them to do something. If you can get them to think and you can get them to feel with a couple of appropriate questions, that I think would be a stronger opening, would then allow Sabyasachi to build that rapport so that when he's getting that laughter, when he wants that interaction later in the speech, he's going to have more people on side, rather than having pessimistic, cynical Scots like me who are crossing our arms going, why should we care? I think if he develops those questions, develops that curiosity, develops that relatability and commonality, it will make the audience care even more for the speech to come.
Then I knew my dream to be an actor was definitely dead. I can never be a performer. So I did what anybody with a broken dream in the city of Amsterdam would do. Take up a job in finance. Now, finance
This point of the speech is the nadir. It's the valley. It's the low point of the story. We go from Sabyasachi's dream of becoming a Bollywood actor. He gets the opportunity to act and dreams are crushed. And here I think Sabyasachi's strength as someone who's energetic, positive, engaging, funny, I think this is where his strength turns into a little bit of a weakness. That he's so positive, so energetic. He's talking about something sad here. He's talking about his dreams being crushed, but he doesn't really sound that sad. He says, my dreams were definitely dead. I could no longer be an actor. So I went and did what anyone who has failed in their dream has done. I got a job in finance. It's energetic. So it sounds more positive, even though this should actually be a low, sad point in the story. So what I'd like to see Sabyasachi do here instead is he's got that moment of, my dreams were definitely dead. I wasn't going to become an actor. Low, slow, pause. Those brilliant facial expressions I was talking about earlier on in the video. Let's not see the facial expressions of humor and quirkiness. Let's really get that pain, failure, sadness. So then I did what anyone whose dreams have been crushed would do. I got a job in finance. So we could have that resigned tone. And even what he could do with getting that job in finance is he turns that into the humor and he turns that into a relief laugh of, yeah, I got a job in finance, and almost that kind of shared, oh no, he's done it. He's had to give up on his dreams and get a job in finance. And then that could be part of that emotional tick up of taking them back out of the low point of the speech and starting to take them on that uplifting journey again. That part of the speech is the only part of the speech which is down and low and sad. The rest of the speech is positive, it's energetic, it's funny. And the problem is, if you stay up here all of the time, you don't take people on that emotional journey. Telling a story is about that emotional journey. When you experience the low, it makes the highs higher. You feel that contrast. The highs feel so brilliant because you know what the low feels like. And here I think this is the opportunity, and it's bang on the perfect time in the speech in terms of the timing. We're in the middle of the speech. We've got the high rise. We go to the low point, and then for the second part of the speech, you're going to be taking them back up out of it. But we need to see that valley rather than just a little cresting of the hills. So I'd want Sabyasachi to dig in deeper there, to go more into that pain, to go more into that sadness, to sit there and feel it with him as the audience. And then when he takes us out of it, when he's telling us jokes, when he's making fun of things, when he's showing us the positive dream, when he's showing us the journey that we can take out of our failures, when he's showing us that when you say yes to an opportunity, you can find new ways to fulfill your dream, that makes it all the more sweet for us. And those are the suggestions that I have for Sabyasachi. We have another world champion of public speaking, a new one to that sacred club. We have a new European champion. And I'm looking forward to seeing where Sabyashi's journey takes him next. And I'm looking forward to, as contest season starts again, getting back on the horse, competing myself, and getting to be a part of this exciting competition, the World Championship of Public Speaking, the thing that really unites us all across the world, that everyone in Toastmasters is striving to be a part of, striving to do well in, and just like Sabyasachi, striving to win. Our dreams of being on that stage, being that performer, how it makes us feel, what it allows us to do, that is the speaker's dream. And Sabyasachi, with his speech, has painted that dream and showed how it can become a reality.